downtown district. Between the rusted blades were tangled gray and brown strands that should never have been there. Mr. Raymond Mitchell had been selling the cheapest cuts of meat in the entire city for 9 years. His customers, working families from the Oak Cliff neighborhood, never questioned why his meat was so affordable when all the other butcher shops charged double. Blind trust had fed entire generations. If you know disturbing stories from your city, share them in the comments. What drives a man respected by an entire community to betray the most basic trust that exists between neighbors? Raymond's story began long before 1965, when he opened his butcher shop. During the 1950s, he had worked in the municipal slaughterhouses of Chicago, where he learned slaughter and processing techniques that few knew in Texas. His mentor, Mr. Frank Sullivan, taught him that survival in the business depended on 3 things: speed, cleanliness, and absolute discretion. Raymond returned to Fort Worth in 1962 with $3,500 saved and enough experience to establish his own business. He bought the shop on Main Street from Mrs. Dorothy Wilson, a widow who urgently needed money to pay medical bills. The price was $2,800, a bargain that included all the hooks, work tables, and the industrial refrigerator. His butcher shop occupied the ground floor of a colonial house built in 1889. The space had high ceilings with wooden beams that creaked during summer storms. 2 main sections divided the space: the main counter where he served customers and a back room where he did the processing. A thick wooden door, painted navy blue, separated both spaces. The first 3 years were prosperous. Raymond established commercial relationships with 2 legal suppliers, brothers Samuel and Austin Parker, who raised cattle on a ranch 40 kilometers from the city. Every Thursday, they arrived with half a carcass that Raymond bought for $180. On Saturdays, Jake Harrison brought 2 slaughtered pigs that cost $95 each, but in 1968, drought ruined regional crops. The Parker brothers lost 60 head of cattle and were forced to raise their prices to $280 per half carcass. Jake Harrison migrated to California seeking better opportunities. Raymond found himself without stable suppliers and with customers who couldn't pay the new market prices. For 6 months, he tried to maintain the business by buying meat from the wholesale market in Dallas. Transportation costs and high prices were driving him to bankruptcy. His wife, Helen, had given birth to their 3rd child, Tommy, and medical expenses consumed their last savings. Desperation took hold of him. The first time was accidental. In January 1969, he hit a large dog with his truck on the outskirts of the city. The animal died instantly, but its body was intact. Raymond impulsively loaded it and took it to the shop. For 2 hours he examined the animal's anatomy, remembering Mr. Sullivan's lessons about adaptability in difficult times. Processing revealed that the meat was surprisingly similar to young pork. After seasoning it with his special blend of paprika, cumin, and oregano, the texture and flavor were practically indistinguishable. Raymond convinced himself he had found a temporary solution to his economic crisis. The golden bell at the entrance rang for the first time with a fraudulent sale on January 23rd, 1969, Mrs. Margaret. Davis bought half a pound of special pork to prepare barbecue. She returned 3 days later, praising the exceptional flavor and asking if she could reserve the same quality for her husband's. Birthday neighbors in the Oak Cliff area began to notice subtle changes starting in 1971. The population of stray dogs, which had always been abundant on the dusty streets, began to gradually decrease. The housewives commented among themselves that they no longer had to shoo away so many animals when hanging clothes in their backyards. Raymond had developed a meticulous system that functioned like a sinister ritual. Every Tuesday and Friday at dawn, when Fort Worth streets were wrapped in silence, he left his house with a burlap sack woven by his own mother years before. He also carried pieces of meat seasoned with pentobarbital, a veterinary sedative he bought from Dr. Harold Spencer, a retired veterinarian who didn't ask uncomfortable questions. The route always began the same way, down Elm Street heading north, then along the abandoned railroad tracks where the largest packs congregated. Raymond knew the schedules of the night watchmen, the houses where there were guard dogs, and the alleys where he could work unseen. The hungry dogs approached without distrust this man who smelled of fresh meat. Raymond had infinite patience. He placed the sedated pieces on the ground and waited for the animals to consume them. The pentobarbital took effect in 15 minutes, first causing drowsiness and then total unconsciousness. He carefully selected his victims. He avoided dogs that seemed sick, malnourished, or too old. He preferred young, apparently healthy animals, weighing between 20 and 35 kilos. He loaded them unconscious into his sack and returned to the butcher shop before dawn. The entire process took him 3 to 4 hours. Back at the shop, he worked under the light of a kerosene lamp that cast dancing shadows on the adobe walls. He had installed improvised acoustic insulation in the back room using old sacks, cardboard, and blankets that Helen had discarded. The electric grinder only operated between 5 and 6 in the morning, when the noise of bread delivery trucks masked any suspicious sounds. His processing technique was the product of years of experience in Chicago slaughterhouses. He carefully skinned each animal, separated the most useful cuts from the hind legs and loin, and disposed of the viscera in bags that he later scattered in different municipal dumpsters during his nighttime walks. He ground the bones to make sausage mixed with chili and intense spices. Raymond had developed a special blend of seasonings he called house seasoning. He combined paprika, toasted cumin, ground black pepper, dried oregano, and a pinch of brine that eliminated any strange or suspicious flavor. The final result was indistinguishable from well-seasoned young pork. The routine included an obsessive cleaning protocol. After each processing, Raymond washed all surfaces with a solution of lime and hot water. He scrubbed the blades with coarse salt and sharpened them until they could cut paper. He scrubbed the floor with soap paste until no trace of blood remained. The rags used he burned in a metal drum in his house's backyard. He maintained 2 types of inventory that never mixed. The premium cuts, which he legally bought from new suppliers he had found in Arlington, he reserved for wealthy clients and special occasions like weddings or baptisms. The irregularly processed meat he sold as economic cuts of the day, exclusively to working families in the neighborhood. The fraudulent accounting required constant creativity. Raymond forged purchase receipts using stamps from non-existent suppliers he had made with an engraver on Commerce Street. He altered dates on legitimate documents and maintained 2 sets of books, one for the authorities and another with the real figures of his clandestine operation, his most frequent. Customers had become unwilling accomplices to a deception that grew each day. Mrs. Rosa Martinez, mother of 5 children and wife of a textile worker, bought half a pound every Wednesday to feed her family on a budget of $40 per week. Her salary as a laundress barely covered the basics. Mrs. Sarah Thompson arrived every Saturday with her 3 small grandchildren to buy meat for Sunday tacos. She had been a widow since 1967 and was raising her deceased daughter's children on a miserable government pension. The $12 she paid per pound and a half at Raymond's butcher shop allowed her to feed 4 people, something impossible at any other establishment. Mr. Robert Jackson completely trusted Raymond to supply the Corner Diner, his small home cooking restaurant located 3 blocks from the butcher shop. He bought 5 pounds weekly of ground meat that he turned into meatballs, hamburgers, and chili stuffing. His diners always praised the particular flavor of the dishes, especially the barbecue tacos he prepared on weekends. Linda Foster, elementary school teacher and single mother, depended on Raymond's prices to feed her 2 student daughters. She bought cheap cuts that she stewed with vegetables to last all week. Her income of $280 monthly barely covered rent, school supplies, and food, so every penny saved meant the difference between having dinner or going to bed hungry. The business worked because Raymond had built a solid reputation that transcended prices. He always gave generous extras, especially to mothers with small children. He remembered the names of all his regular customers and asked about their families. He extended credit without interest to families in financial trouble and never pressured for immediate payment. His shop was kept impeccably clean, with the cement floor washed daily and the metal hooks shining like mirrors. Flies, a common plague in all the region's butcher shops, seemed to avoid Raymond's establishment. The display case windows were always transparent, and the smell emanating from the shop was pleasant, a mixture of spices and fresh meat. The neighborhood children adored Mr. Raymond. He gave them small pieces of sausage when they accompanied their mothers, let them ring the golden bell at the entrance, and always had caramel candies in a glass jar next to the cash register. This apparent generosity built unbreakable loyalty among families. But the routine had danger. Rouse cracks that constantly threatened his operation. Municipal health inspectors made surprise visits every 3 months, following an irregular calendar designed to detect irregularities. Michael Baker, the chief inspector, was meticulous and had developed detection techniques that other municipalities adopted as a model. Raymond had learned to recognize the white municipal health truck from 2 blocks away. The vehicle had a characteristic dent in the driver's door and made a particular engine noise that gave it away before turning the corner. When Raymond heard that sound, he immediately activated his emergency protocol. He always maintained a minimum stock of completely legal meat in the main refrigerator, bought specifically to show during inspections. These were expensive cuts he never sold, renewed weekly to maintain freshness. The cost of this display meat was considerable, but necessary for his survival. Compromising evidence disappeared in less than 5 minutes, thanks to a secret compartment he had built under the floor of the back room. A loose wooden board, secured with fake nails, hid an 80-centimeter deep hole where he stored bones, collars, altered documents, and specific tools that shouldn't be seen during official inspections. The documents were his most vulnerable Achilles' heel. The purchase records he presented to authorities never completely matched the real volume of sales he handled daily. Raymond had forged receipts from supposed rural suppliers, altered dates on legitimate invoices, and created a complex web of lies that became harder to sustain each day. The mathematical inconsistencies were evident to any competent inspector. According to his official documents, he bought approximately 200 kilos of meat weekly, but his daily sales suggested handling at least 350 kilos per week. The 150-kilo difference represented the heart of his clandestine operation, impossible to explain legally. Raymond had tried to resolve this discrepancy by creating invoices from completely fictitious suppliers. He invented 3 non-existent cattle ranches, Lone Star in Weatherford, Golden Valley in Granbury, and Prairie Wind in Cleburne. For each one he manufactured official stamps, letterheads, and even phone numbers that directed to public phones where no one ever answered. The stress of maintaining this double life began to manifest physically in his body and behavior. He developed a nervous tic in his left eyelid that intensified dramatically when unknown customers or authorities arrived at the shop. His hands, always impeccable and well cared for, began to show small wounds he explained as normal accidents of the butcher trade. His sleep patterns deteriorated completely. Insomnia became his constant companion, spending hours awake calculating risks, mentally reviewing every detail of his operation, and planning responses to hypothetical inspector questions. Recurring nightmares always included distant barking and the metallic sound of the bell ringing nonstop. Family meals became tense and uncomfortable. Raymond ate very little in his own home, especially when Helen prepared stews with meat. His children noticed that Dad moved food around his plate without taking it to his mouth, claiming lack of appetite or stomach problems. The irony of rejecting meat at home while selling fraudulent meat at the business tormented him constantly. His wife, Helen, observed the changes with growing concern, but maintained the silence that characterized women of her generation. She noticed that Raymond had become quieter during dinners, that he smoked compulsively in the backyard until late at night, and that his clothes often smelled of disinfectant. Even after coming home from work, Raymond's nighttime crying began in the summer of 1972. Helen would wake up hearing muffled sobs he tried to hide under the pillow. When she asked what was wrong, he invented excuses about business financial problems or back pain from carrying so much weight. She knew he was lying, but in that era, wives didn't directly question their husbands. The mood swings were increasingly pronounced. Raymond could go from exaggerated kindness with customers to explosions of anger at home over insignificant matters. He yelled at his children for normal noises, got upset when Helen moved objects from their place, and developed an obsession with keeping all doors and windows of the house closed during nights. In 1973, the situation became dramatically complicated when municipal authorities initiated a canine population control campaign in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. Veterinarian Dr. George Martinez began castrating and vaccinating stray dogs, significantly reducing the population available for Raymond's nocturnal activities. This official intervention forced him to radically modify his collection routes, venturing into more distant neighborhoods where they didn't know him as the respectable downtown butcher. The risks increased exponentially with each nocturnal expedition to areas like East Fort Worth, Trinity Gardens, and the industrial zones near the railroad station. During one of those dangerous expeditions, he was almost discovered by Carl Williams, a night watchman at the Liberty Textile Factory. It was 3 a.m. when Carl saw a suspicious figure carrying something heavy in a sack near the abandoned train tracks. The encounter was tense. Carl approached with his flashlight and regulation club, demanding to know what Raymond was doing at that hour in the industrial zone. Raymond, with his heart beating violently, had to invent a story about collecting copper scrap to sell at the second-hand market. He showed some metal pieces he always carried as an alibi. Carl examined the sack without finding anything suspicious, but noted Raymond's name in his surveillance log. He warned him that the area was prohibited for civilians during nights and that he would report any strange activity to municipal authorities. Raymond promised not to return, but knew his operation was in mortal danger. The psychological pressure reached unbearable levels when innocent customers began making comments that tormented him deeply. Little Amy Martinez, Mrs. Rose's daughter, barely 6 years old, asked him one Tuesday afternoon why the meat from his butcher shop tasted different from her grandmother's house in Arlington. Raymond responded with a forced smile that trembled at the corners, explaining that his special seasoning was a family secret inherited from his father. But the innocent question haunted him for entire weeks, appearing in his nightmares where small children asked him the same question over and over until he woke up screaming. Mr. Samuel Parker, one of his former legal suppliers, visited the butcher shop in December 1973 to buy meat as a customer. He praised the exceptional flavor of the cuts and asked who his new supplier was, since the quality had improved notably since they ended their commercial relationship. Raymond invented a story about a family ranch in Oklahoma, but the lies were accumulating dangerously. The processing nights became horror rituals that Raymond executed on autopilot. His hands worked mechanically, while his mind disconnected from reality. He had developed the ability to process the animals without thinking about what he was really doing, as if another person were performing those monstrous tasks. Guilt manifested in increasingly evident physical symptoms. He lost 12 pounds in 6 months, his hair began to gray prematurely, and he developed a stomach ulcer that made him occasionally vomit blood. Helen insisted on taking him to the doctor, but he categorically refused, claiming that doctors were too expensive. Health. Inspector Michael Baker had received 3 anonymous complaints about irregularities at Raymond's butcher shop during the summer of 1974. The complaints, written in feminine handwriting on school notebook paper, mentioned strange smells during early mornings, grinder noises at unusual hours, and the suspicious decrease of dogs in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. The first complaint arrived in June, signed only as "a concerned mother." It described the sweet and metallic smell that emanated from the butcher shop's ventilation grills during the early morning hours, an aroma different from a normal butcher shop. It also mentioned that her domestic dog refused to walk down that specific street. The second complaint, received in August, was more specific. It described electric grinder noises operating between 4 and 6 in the morning, when no butcher shop should be operating. The anonymous complainant had timed these noises for 2 weeks, and noticed they always occurred on Tuesdays and Fridays, never other days of the week. The third complaint was the most disturbing. A neighbor from Elm Street reported that she had seen Raymond walking with a large sack during early mornings, heading toward the railroad tracks. She mentioned that after those walks, the neighborhood dogs barked nervously for hours, as if they had witnessed something disturbing. On October 15th, 1974, Baker arrived at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before Raymond opened to the public. He found the back door of the shop ajar and decided to enter without announcing himself. The smell emerging from the processing room was different from the normal aroma of a traditional butcher shop. He found the first evidence in the meat grinder. Several long hairs, clearly canine, were stuck to the metal blades. Baker also noticed that the hooks for hanging meat had marks of recent use, but there were no traces of registered suppliers in the unloading area. Raymond arrived at the shop 30 minutes later and found the inspector examining his work tools. His reaction was immediate. His hands began to tremble, the eye tick intensified, and his voice broke when he tried to explain the presence of the hair as accidental contamination from outside. Baker requested to see all purchase documents from the last 6 months. Raymond produced a folder with receipts that presented altered dates and suspicious stamps. The inconsistencies were evident. He supposedly bought 200 kilos of meat per week, but his daily sales suggested handling at least 350 kilos weekly. The investigation extended to the back room. Under a loose floorboard, Baker found bones that didn't correspond to bovine or porcine livestock. There were also remains of dog collars, some with identification tags that included names like Buddy and Rex, pets that several neighborhood families had reported as lost during recent years. Raymond collapsed. In a green plastic chair he had next to the counter, his eyes filled with tears, and his breathing became irregular. For the first time in 9 years, the weight of what he had been doing fell on him like a concrete slab. The confession was spontaneous and detailed. Raymond explained that everything had begun as a desperate solution to his economic problems. Official suppliers demanded immediate payments he couldn't cover, and neighborhood families needed affordable prices that allowed him to compete. He acknowledged having processed approximately 400 dogs during 9 years. Each animal allowed him to obtain between 8 and 12 kilos of usable meat, which he sold at $12 per kilo when legal meat cost $25 in the market. His annual profits had been approximately $15,000, money he used to support his family and pay the shop rent. Raymond also admitted having developed a selection system. He avoided dogs that seemed sick or malnourished, preferred young and apparently healthy animals, and never touched pets wearing collars in good condition, trying to limit his activity to truly abandoned dogs. The news spread through the Oak Cliff neighborhood like wildfire. The first reactions were of total disbelief. Mrs. Rosa refused to believe that the meat she had bought for years to feed her children had that origin. Mr. Robert closed his restaurant immediately and vomited. For 3 straight days, the community divided between those who demanded to lynch Raymond and those who secretly recognized they had suspected something strange but had never dared to ask. The entire neighborhood experienced a crisis of confidence that affected not only Raymond but all local merchants. Municipal authorities acted quickly. The butcher shop was immediately closed, all products were confiscated and sent for forensic analysis, and Raymond was arrested on charges of commercial fraud, food adulteration, and violation of health regulations. The legal process lasted 8 months. Raymond was sentenced to 5 years in prison and payment of a fine equivalent to $50,000. His commercial license was permanently revoked and the butcher shop's assets were seized to compensate affected families. The psychological consequences for the community were devastating. Several housewives developed food anxiety and began buying only at chain store butcher shops, even though this meant spending double. Children who had consumed the meat for years needed psychological support to process the information. The story became urban legend in Fort Worth. For decades, every time a butcher shop offered suspiciously low prices, neighbors remembered Raymond's case. Distrust toward local merchants lasted an entire generation. Helen, Raymond's wife, had to move to another city with her 2 youngest children. Social shame was unbearable. Her children changed their last name when they reached majority age and never spoke publicly about their father's story. Municipal records indicate that between 1974 and 1980, 3 more butcher shops in Fort Worth were closed for minor irregularities, but none were legally prosecuted. Health inspectors had learned to be more thorough, and merchants understood that the community was alert. Raymond was released from prison in 1979. He worked as an employee at a meatpacking plant on the city outskirts, always under strict supervision. He never again managed his own business. He died in 1987 of a heart attack, taking to his grave details he never shared during his confession. The butcher shop remained closed for 2 years. The space was later converted into a grocery store that failed in less than 6 months. Then it operated as a radio repair shop, later as a dental office, and finally, as a construction materials warehouse. The golden bell that announced each customer's entrance was removed by new managements, but some older neighbors assure that during early mornings, you can still hear its metallic sound when wind moves the entrance door. In 1995, a journalism student from the University of North Texas tried to write a thesis about the case. He managed to interview 5 affected families, but the project was abandoned when several interviewees refused to continue, participating for considering it too painful to remember. The case's judicial files occupy 3 boxes in the basement of the Tarrant County Superior Court. They include photographs of evidence found, complete testimonies of 47 neighbors, forensic analyses of confiscated meat samples, and Raymond's complete confession, handwritten on 23 pages with trembling letters. Mrs. Rosa, the butcher shop's most frequent customer, never again bought ground meat. She developed an obsession with personally knowing the suppliers of everything her family consumed. Her children, now adults, remember that for years she verified the origin of each food before preparing it. The case established precedents in municipal health legislation. Starting in 1975, all Fort Worth butcher shops had to present purchase invoices weekly and submit to surprise inspections every month. Supplier records became public and any citizen could consult them. Michael Baker, the inspector who discovered the fraud, was promoted to regional supervisor. During the rest of his career, he developed irregularity detection techniques that were adopted in other Texas municipalities. He retired in 1990, having closed 23 establishments for health violations. Raymond's story became a case study in veterinary schools and food safety programs. His name appears in health inspection manuals as an example of how community trust can be systematically exploited during prolonged periods. In 2010, the television program Forbidden Files dedicated a complete episode to the case. Affected families refused to participate, but several experts analyzed the psychological and social implications of the fraud. The episode was removed from the air after 2 transmissions due to pressure from victims' descendants. Currently, Main Street, where the butcher shop operated, is a prosperous commercial zone. A modern pharmacy occupies the space where Raymond deceived his neighbors for 9 years. New neighborhood residents completely ignore the story, but older neighbors still walk on the opposite sidewalk when passing in front of the premises. The question that persists in municipal files is disturbing. If Raymond managed to maintain his deception for 9 years in a small community where everyone knew each other, how many similar cases remain undiscovered in other Texas cities? The files also reveal a disturbing detail that was never made public. During the investigation, dog hair was found in meat samples from 2 other butcher shops in the historic downtown, but the cases were filed without official explanation. What does it say about us as a society that 400 families ate for years, something they would never have consciously accepted? And why didn't any neighbor dare to directly confront their suspicions until official authority arrived? The Golden Bell, which announced 2,847 fraudulent sales according to Raymond's cash register records, was finally melted in 1982, along with other metal objects from the closed shop. If everyone knew something wasn't right, why didn't anyone close that door before? Share in the comments what you think of this story right now.